The dust may have settled, but the future of Xbox is still a little foggy. Happy 4th of July, friends. If at least here in the United States, it is a holiday, but the show must go on. Sometimes I take this day off, but given everything that's happened, particularly with the layoff situation at Microsoft, there was too much to kind of dig through and I like to wrap things up as the dust starts to settle. And so, yeah, there's definitely things to talk about today and a lot of good questions that we need to dive into. And one thing that Xbox absolutely cannot do, but we will get to that here in just a little bit. Anyways, hopefully everybody had a wonderful week, as good as it could be, I guess, given all the news in the world of gaming and everywhere else. So let's dive into this. One's a little bit different if you're watching on the video, where I wrapped everything up into more bullet points than particular headlines. So let's sort of dive into here. So Microsoft announced layoffs, approximately 9,000 employees, or about 4% of their total workforce, which sounds small, and people will always love to point out, like, these are just normal corporate rifts. This is a little different. First off, for this year alone, I believe Microsoft is north of 17,000 positions have been eliminated, because they did 6,000 earlier, and then January there was like another 1,000 or so. So there have been a lot of cuts across Microsoft just in the calendar year of 2025, and it's obviously having a pretty significant impact on morale. There's no other way to describe that. But this round of layoffs appear to primarily have impacted sales and Xbox. And sales took Microsoft's changing up strategy about how they're doing sales, and Xbox, which will be the focus of the content here going forward, was dramatically impacted. Games canceled, and just things are shifting. So let's get into some of these Xbox details here. First off, this is, I believe, the fourth major mass layoff inside of Xbox. Mass meaning over probably like 50 people in the past 18 months. So Rare was hit with layoffs. We know that. Everwild, which is with the video playing right now, has been canceled. So people always say, like, well, why would they cancel a game and do all this stuff? So there's a couple things that Microsoft is obviously on the beating end of this stick. And people are like, well, why would they cancel a game if it's been in development for so long? I think that's the problem. I think the real problem here is that Microsoft is like, look, we have projections and we have trajectories that we need to hit for various things. And like, these games are just sucking up so much money. And if they're not, here's the thing that I can probably say with a pretty high level of confidence. If Everwild was like 3 months away from shipping or 6 months away from shipping, they would not have canceled the game. But at this point, I think this was first shown off either in like 2018 or maybe it was 2019. And here we are in 2025, and it still hasn't shipped. There's been rumors of reboots and recalibrations. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Microsoft is spending real money to get these games out the door, and if they can't ship, then what are they doing? And so that's, I think the reality was like, yeah, they're trying to avoid that sunk cost fallacy. Well, we've already spent X amount of, probably hundreds of millions potentially at this point, and to get this out the door, and they probably look and say, well, it'll probably only make, and by the way, they probably have a pretty good idea of how much money it would make based on previous sales of other games. Our likely projection is this: we have to spend X amount to get more money into the company to get it out the door. Like, the math just doesn't math anymore. And so then they're like, hey, it's over. And so, yeah, they were done. That is done. The Warcraft Rumble team has also been laid off. Blizzard appears to be winding down that game's active development. Turn 10, which is makers of traditionally known as the Forza titles, things bounce around, but traditionally that's what people know them for. Sounds like up to 50%, 40 to 50%. It was a significant amount of layoffs at Turn 10. So the other big game that I think has a lot of people bummed out, myself included, is Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark has been canceled, and I think this falls exactly back into that Everwild category. If it was like right around the corner of being shipped, then it would have shipped. But this game, I'm pretty sure, was announced in 2020. And so this was definitely during that era when it was the meme was Xbox has no games. And so Xbox was announcing everything that they were starting. And here we are again in 2025, and it doesn't sound like there has been any meaningful progress that was like saying, hey, it's right around the corner. Now, people look at these trailers and say, but look, it looks so polished, that this looks great. Like, that's the problem. That is exactly what they're supposed to do. And now they claim that this was in-engine, but it's a vertical slice. And a vertical slice is a mechanics show-off, if you will, where they say these are all the different types of elements that'll be in the game. And so, like, these are the things. But, like, even to me, this what is appears to be, I don't know, playthrough, it feels too smooth is the only way to describe it. Like, it's very programmatic. And so I while I'm not saying this isn't in engine, but it was probably like, it obviously heavily scripted. It's a trailer. So anyways, Perfect Dark will not be shipping. And so, yeah, King and ZeniMax were hit with layoffs. The new ZeniMax online IP Blackbird will not be shipping. The interesting thing, but rumored about Blackbird, is that apparently Phil Spencer was playing it and like couldn't put it down, but then they just canceled it. But again, like these things, it's easy to say from an outsider perspective. It's like, wow, if the CEO of Xbox Gaming loved it, why isn't it shipping? Well, like, how close was it to actually shipping, and how much more money was needed, right? Microsoft is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to get these things out the door. And again, if they don't think they can do it, and they don't think it's going to generate the return, they're starting to kill projects. The era of Xbox just throwing money and time at development studios is over. So now it's they got to start shipping, and they got to be shipping consistently. So there were also multiple Call of Duty studios hit with layoffs. Halo Studios, which we generally think of as 343, there were cuts there. You've got to remember that there were larger cuts, like when Bonnie was left the company and various other things over the years. So there were a small amount of layoffs, it sounds like, at 343. Undead Labs was hit as well. I don't think anybody got out of this unscathed, but it doesn't appear to have impacted any titles based on what a lot of people are writing up. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that one. Jez Corden said, no, nothing has been titled there. Third-party downstream effects. So there's a studio called Romero Games. I believe they're in Ireland. Their entire funding, it sounds like, has been completely pulled. And so they are one of those downstream effects that we don't typically think of, but this is absolutely wrecking impact for everybody who's in the Xbox stream and ecosystem. So if you were providing software sales or whatever to Xbox, you were likely impacted some way from an outside third-party perspective, because again, they're cutting contractors, they're cutting everything. And so the whole gaming community just sort of contracted through all of these layoffs and contacts and everything else. And so, yeah, it has been pretty brutal for Xbox to get through all this. There's a lot of people who are very angry from the Xbox fan community. There's a lot of people who are angry just at Microsoft in general, because they tend to kill things that people love and enjoy. And let's be real here, Xbox is a community, a consumer platform for Microsoft, and it's like really their only one. Yeah, somebody will say Surface, but friends, I got to tell you, Surface is not the Surface you know and love. Surface is a mere shell of what it used to be, right? The leadership is all gone. They're just kicking out ODM devices that are safe, and there's no real risk taking that we see occurring there in any meaningful way anymore. And so it's really just Xbox. But someone will say, Brad, but what about Windows? Well, Windows, yes, but Windows is more of this productivity tool now. People do game on it, so I guess I shouldn't discount that. But Windows is not, it's not the only game in town anymore. Most people are on mobile devices. Microsoft has no mobile platform of its own through their own issues that, predate this, but it's, again, one of those consumer things, endpoints, touch points that they have failed on. And so now Xbox is like that last thing many of us were grasping onto. And then they come out and say, like, look, we're doing this great acquisitions. We have these huge plans. And then, the times get tough, and they just start slashing things and burning a lot of the goodwill that they had developed. One thing I do want to point out, and I will link to this below, Jez Corden did a great write-up about, it's sort of what I was just hitting on there, about how Microsoft has lost its mojo with the consumer, and it's hard to be a fan of them. And he wrote up it's worth a read. It is definitely worth a read, because I think he makes a lot of good points. However, I want to point one particular thing out. He says, sources who remain anonymous due to lack of authority to speak on internal matters have pointed the blame for yesterday's mammoth layoffs firmly at Microsoft CFO Amy Hood. That is factual. Anybody who's watched this channel, this podcast, has known for a while. I've been saying that Microsoft has to pay back these massive loans that they've taken from the CFO, Amy Hood. Now, you can go read all the comments, and they're like saying, Brad, you don't know what you're talking about. They have this asset. That's how they pay back. That's not how this works. Now, it's not Phil Spencer going and writing a check for his mortgage each month. But when you take that sort of money, they expect, especially the CFO, expects growth and profitability. And so Xbox was clearly not on that pathway with the assets and people that they had in place. And so they have to make changes. They're cutting things that aren't going to return the profits they expect. And so they are making good on those business promises. You can even go read Phil Spencer's letter that he wrote, or email that he wrote, and he really says the business expectations. You have to understand that Xbox is a business. They took on massive bets, and so they have to show sizable and sustainable returns. And so that is the core challenge to the Xbox business. And realistically, the Xbox business does not fit super well within the rest of the Microsoft org. Many analysts for years have been saying, spin it out because it doesn't make sense. Xbox has traditionally not been an ARR, an annual reoccurring revenue business, which is what Microsoft loves. Now they're trying to do that with Game Pass. Obviously, they have Xbox Live, which generates revenue, but the core business is ship game, get $60 once or $70 or whatever it is, and then the cycle starts all over again. Then you try to get $60 again from the same person a few years later, or in the terms of Call of Duty, every single year. It's a challenge within the greater Microsoft org to align to those expectations. And Xbox is doing what it thinks is the right thing, but it's challenging. You have to go read these things from a business lens to understand why they're happening. Not from I would have loved to play Perfect Dark, but would it have been profitable? If it's not going to be profitable and they can't get out from under that, then the project is not going to exist. So you got to remember, every game, everything they do has to make money. It's not a charity. Microsoft is a very cutthroat business. Ask anybody who's been there. That is the way that it works inside the Microsoft org. And that's why they're so large. I mean, you can make arguments and say well, this is dumb. I don't like the company, but you know what? They're making record profits. And unfortunately, that is the business Microsoft is, a company that makes a lot of money, and they will do everything they can to make more money, even if it hurts your feelings. That's the reality of it. And so, based on Phil Spencer's memo, we can discern a lot of things, again, that I've really wrapped up here. It's ship or die. It's ship or die time. If you cannot maintain control of the studio and the title and everything else that you're doing, and you can't get things out the door, it's no longer going to get funded, and it's going to get cut. Microsoft is very clearly refocusing on only high-quality bets that they know have a high degree of probability of paying off. One of the business philosophies that I believe in is that if you believe something has a better than good chance of succeeding, then you bet heavily on it. And so if Microsoft is looking at these titles and say it doesn't have a better than good chance of being a huge success, they're pulling funding and they're scaling back. We already saw some of this, by the way, which most people somewhat picked up on, or maybe not, right? We've seen a long string of single-player titles coming out of Microsoft, right? Indiana Jones, we've seen Doom, we've seen VAT, we've seen all these titles. Very clearly, it's much cheaper to produce just a single story-driven narrative than it is to produce these high-quality multiplayer experiences that many of us love and love to play. And so by Microsoft focusing on single-player initiatives, obviously that cuts down on the budget needed to ship a title, and they're probably looking at the calculations of okay, how did Doom do? How did Indiana Jones do? Is this model sustainable of only shipping single-player? And I know not everything's perfectly single-player, but just follow me here. But single-player, story-driven narrative titles that are much less expensive to produce, if we start cranking those out on a very systematic basis, does that pay the bills and show the growth that we expect? That is something we don't know yet, but something we will likely find out, and something Microsoft is very surely trying to understand internally if that is a thing that can be done. Spinning up new IP is insanely expensive, right? For not just the concept, the idea, the artwork, everything that has to go into it. The lore. And so I'm curious, and we don't know definitively one way or another, right? Microsoft went big with Starfield. Starfield was a huge bet. Did it not pay off? It may not have. We don't know, right? I mean, are there legions of Starfield fans out there like there are for other titles in that genre? I don't know if there are, but the reality is that was a big, expensive launch. Where does it stand within the ecosystem of success for Xbox? Again, I'm not trying to say that it's a bad game. I'm not trying to say Microsoft shouldn't have shipped it. I'm just pointing out the facts here that if the title did not generate positive ROI, the likelihood of Microsoft taking those bets with another Everwild or similar style investment, it shrinks versus putting money into, say, Minecraft or Call of Duty or other things where they know the return will be there. So we do know that Microsoft, by the way, is going to be shipping more hardware. That is not, it didn't sound like the hardware teams were hit too hard through this. I'm sure some people were, but it doesn't sound like the hardware teams were gutted by any means. However, based on everything we know so far, the hardware of tomorrow for the next generation doesn't really sound like it's going to be the hardware that we kind of know today, right? The monolithic console that sits under the TV. There's going to be a divergence of what the expectations are going forward, but it does sound like Xbox will continue to be building hardware. We've seen the AMD announcements, we've seen Sarah Bond announcements and all that. Also, through all of this fog of war, if you will, during all the layoffs, it came out that Phil Spencer is going to retire after the next generation console ships, which was immediately shot down by Microsoft. So this is one of those things that, like, probably technically it could be correct, by the way, because, hey, the next now, if he retires like 3 days from now, that is a whole different thing. But if he retires after the next console ships in 20 years from now, he's in his 50s, so that's probably unlikely, but it's technically correct. But I think the expectation was like the console will ship, and then like 3 months later, he's out, like he's going to retire. Microsoft shot that down. So that does not sound like that's accurate. And yeah, keep in mind though, like I'm not saying it's not true, and I'm not trying to add any validity to this, but Microsoft's not going to come out and say, yeah, Phil Spencer's retiring in 3 years or something like that. That's not how Microsoft would operate. And there are some ramifications from that from, I guess, a legal perspective. But here we are. The other kind of crazy thing that did happen is, so right after all this happened, Helldivers 2, a PlayStation game, is coming to Xbox. So you can't ignore that this was a very topsy-turvy week, by the way, because PlayStation it's too early to say they're going all in on the direction of Xbox, right? We all know what Xbox is doing now, but what did Xbox start with? Like Sea of Thieves was one of the first titles. These live action titles or these live service titles need a population base, and PlayStation is like, look, we're going to try this. This feels like a canary moment where they will put the game over on Xbox, see how it performs, because there's high expectations that it can perform. This type of title is probably one of their best, right? And so if this performs well, it would definitely open the door to the conversation of them putting more titles, because at the end of the day, Sony is also looking to make more money, right? That's what these companies exist. And so while it's far from like seeing Spider-Man natively on an Xbox console, it's not, I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation to assume that it's not impossible. Now, I don't expect them to do like day one releases like Microsoft. I don't think Microsoft is doing that yet. If they like that timed exclusive, I expect that would be a model that PlayStation would follow. But at the end of the day, if Helldivers 2 generates a ton of money for PlayStation, they would be foolish to say, like, you know what, we don't want more money. We want to sell more hardware. But guys, you have to understand that hardware is not where these companies make money. Nintendo is always the outlier. They do make some, but where they make the money is selling games, right? Because there's no physical device that you have to ship and put on a customer's house. So yeah, the industry is changing a ton overnight. However, when it comes to Xbox, there's absolutely one thing they cannot do this month, and they're so misaligned with some of their thoughts processes sometimes that they might do this. Remember like 3-4 weeks ago, there was some talk of somebody finding information on an Xbox website about a price increase for Game Pass. Microsoft, please do not announce that right now. That would be horrific. If they announce that in the month of July, it will be just a blind side of ignorance about what the actual expectations are of the consumer. Maybe they just don't care. They're like, look, we got to do this to make more money, but please, Microsoft, do not announce that Game Pass is going up after you just did all of this negative damage to your brand. So yeah. All right. Whew, that's a lot of talk about not fun things. Let's dive into the questions this week, because there are always my favorite part. And so let's just dive in here. I always post them on YouTube, and so you can find them on YouTube at BD Sams on YouTube. So Oliver 1C says, the venture capitalist firm A16Z says the battle between every startup and incumbent comes down to whether the startup gets distribution before the incumbent gets innovation. I believe that firmly, right? Right now there's a cat and mouse game, if you will, going on between, I don't even want to say Microsoft, but you have like ChatGPT is the very, very clear market leader from a mind share perspective. They may not always have the best models. I think Anthropic's Claude development code models, or Claude and their Sonnet 4, which I've been using a lot, is superior to ChatGPT right now. However, ChatGPT, OpenAI, has the brand recognition. And so, yes, I believe that is true. And that's why these startups, if they have an idea and it's got merit, get funded so heavily, because if they can get out into the market before the incumbents like Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Amazon can turn those mammoth tankers of a company, then yeah, because effectively all the companies that is listed have unlimited money. Microsoft has already said they're planning to spend like $80 billion on infrastructure and other things like that, which is bled over into the cuts into Xbox. So yeah, that is absolutely true, which is why when you see these companies getting funding, they're getting so much. It's because they have to get out ahead brand-wise of the incumbents, because the incumbents will always be able to outspend the startup. So I believe that. Logan says, be rad, happy 4th. Eat a burger, riddle, and smash burgers out on the griddle tonight. And a refreshing Columbus Company brewing beer. He recommends Juicy Bodhi. I'm terrible with pronunciation. Anyways, I will definitely be doing both, although I'll probably be drinking a local Cincy brew. He said, there's been a lot of chatter in Discord about people saying Spencer should be fired. Do you really think he's the reason all these cuts are happening? I don't think Spencer should be fired. These things are a calculus, right? Let's be clear here. The company agreed to buy Activision. Phil Spencer may have gone to the board and saying like, look, this is something we should do. The whole company agreed spending this much money was a smart idea at the time. Now the question becomes, was he in charge or responsible for the mismanagement of, like, say, not getting Perfect Dark out, not getting Everwild out, I don't know what Phil Spencer is like behind the PR curtain, right? He has this very soft, gentle, loving attitude for gaming, right? He's not known to be a Bill Gates, if you will, or a Steve Jobs, where it's like real definitive hardline sort of thing. And so I don't know what he's like when they're sitting in a conference room and a game isn't going on rails to the development path. And so he could be, a fox in sheep's clothing, that sort of mentality. However, here's the thing. Phil Spencer's career will be dictated on Game Pass success. I firmly believe a lot of that because it's such a fundamental shift. Now, there's a couple things that may happen here. Phil Spencer did the hard thing. It is not easy to spin from a business that they were traditionally, which people get really wound up in the wrong way about this. Xbox was not on a trajectory to be the market leader with the Xbox One, with the Series S and X. Xbox One is where they dropped the ball, and so they were in a recovery stance, and they took a huge swing and a huge risk to try to get Game Pass as a thing. And we don't know the numbers, so it doesn't sound like it's a huge home run if it's a success, but pivoting from a traditional business model and turning that is not easy. And he has done it, and he's made it generate success, I guess is the best way to describe it, but we don't know the actual funding, if it's as successful as it needs to be sustainable. You got to remember too that Xbox in theory could be profitable as a business, but it might not be profitable enough for the Microsoft org, which is used to the software level margins across everything. So should Phil Spencer be fired? I don't know. That I don't have enough information. I don't have enough wherewithal to say like, yeah, he should be. People are very rightfully upset that studios are getting cut. And I guarantee if you ask any of the people who are swept up in these acquisitions and got laid off, they probably would say it. You have to remember that, 9,000 people lost their jobs. That's 9,000 individuals who have mortgages, have families, more than likely, have a dog, a cat, a house, a car. And these are real people. And so that sucks. Like, I've been laid off myself early in my career, and it hits you like a sack of bricks, especially when it's not because of your own performance or something that you did, but because of what the company did. That makes it worse. Like, it's one thing, like, if you screw up and like you're fired and like, it's because, well, you know what? I dropped this hammer on the glass table and broke it, and now I'm fired. Like, that's a real simple example. But like, when you get let go because of somebody else's decision and poor mismanagement, that really sucks, because you went in, you did everything you could, and it just wasn't good enough for the rest of the company. That sucks. So, Nali Rafik. Hi, Brad. The rumors of the relationship failing between Microsoft and OpenAI are getting stronger day after day. So if the relationship completely breaks between both of them, is it going to be the biggest blowout in Microsoft history? It might be. So there's other large screw-ups, like the whole how much money they invested in Windows Phone and it completely went sideways. But the thing about Windows Phone, yes, it sucks, but the company has candidly thrived without that mobile platform. Not been easy. Would they like a mobile platform? Absolutely. But they're okay at the end of the day. If they miss on AI, like if this relationship somehow falls apart, which would be a very ugly divorce, by the way, an extremely ugly divorce, and they are left holding not the bag, but they'd have to get some value out of this, but not having access to ChatGPT's models and everything else, they would be substantially set back. We all know that Microsoft is trying to build these models internally, and they just shipped one in Windows, a small model for settings, but they don't have, Copilot does not sound like it's a brand that is exploding with customers and businesses. It just doesn't, right? There was a Bloomberg article saying like, hey, people just want to use ChatGPT. I get it. I understand that too. I prefer ChatGPT and Claude over Copilot. Why? Just because you're getting that vanilla native experience, and it's outside the realm of Windows. It's outside the world of Microsoft, right? Microsoft's biggest strength is inertia. Microsoft's biggest weakness is just inertia. And so like Microsoft thinks like they can just shove all this stuff place everywhere and just have and I don't want to say really good, but like good experiences, and that people will just adopt it. Like those days are so long gone, and Microsoft has tried really hard. If Copilot does not, latch into the market, that is like head should roll mentality. Like that, you talk about Phil Spencer getting fired for the Activision things not going well. If Microsoft can't truly make Copilot a success, and I mean like a financial success for how much they've invested in the infrastructure for all this, that is the only people they can look at there is in the mirror and say like, we made all these decisions and it didn't work, starting something up while these startups are destroying us. And so Microsoft got very lucky investing in OpenAI early. So I believe that was Kevin Scott, and Bill Gates may have been involved with that. It was genius, right? That was. Imagine if they did not have that, how much trouble they would be in right now. So Warren says, if not Xbox themselves, could a third party produce an Xbox with an upgradable processor set on a removable card, much like the desktop PC, but in a console? I don't think it's impossible to think this. We don't know enough yet about how this is going to be happening for the next generation. But if you go listen real carefully to what AMD has said, they said multiple things, and it sounds like multiple different processors. My personal expectation is, I don't know if you'll be able to just like pop out a CPU or whatever and replace it and get more performance, but my expectation is that there's going to be more consoles, if you will, coming out faster or maybe annually with better performance each year, rather than these large gaps that we get. They're going to the PC model, and part of me thinks that AMD, just bear with me here for a second, will Microsoft and AMD will have a locked spec of what Xbox 2026 is, right? And then and then in 2028 they might have a new spec, and then everything is backwards forwards compatible, and everything just moves across like PC gaming. And maybe every 2 years we're getting an update, maybe it's every year. But AMD will ship the base for all this, and then OEMs will just build an Xbox, if you will, or you can build an Xbox. I don't know, but my expectation is there's going to be a locked configuration set that is a true Xbox console, and then branded console, and that will be updated more frequently. But I don't know if that means you can open it up, pull out a CPU, and put a new one in. So that is a question for modders once we have more information. Widja says, hi Brad, among all the bad news in the gaming industry, is it possible to discern some kind of silver lining towards Microsoft's actions? So there's a couple silver linings here. Microsoft will not ship, I should say this carefully, Microsoft will not ship another Redfall. Right? Redfall, anything that was going to be in that category has been cut. I expect that Everwild or Perfect Dark was probably in there. A Redfall will not happen again at Microsoft. At least it shouldn't, based on everything that we've seen. They are refocusing on things that people want to play. So yes, you're going to see probably more content from the titles and franchises that you know and like, would be my expectation, that they are getting the focus of the attention rather than trying to empower studios to create new things and new IP, because it's proven to be expensive and the uptake rate and the success rate is too low. So that is likely some of the most positive outcome. There's not a ton from that. However, you could look at the Helldiver stuff and say that's pretty optimistic and positive. I think the direction that Microsoft is heading is more sound than trying to ship another console and continue to play yesterday's game. Shipping a locked piece of hardware worked for many generations, but I think that time has passed. And so Nintendo will be able to continue on its path because it's a different type of company, and it's not like Nintendo has a ton of IP, but they have some. Nintendo is just really, really good at shipping super polished things, and that maintains them afloat, and it works well for them. So, and then Jovio says, Brad, why does Microsoft or Xbox many times take 2 steps forward and 1 step back? This is one of the biggest flaws. They can get momentum is trying to climb an uphill battle, and they can't see it. So I tend to agree with this. I mean, there's literally been 2 steps forward and 1 step back here recently, right? Cirebon came out with that video and said, look, we're building a new console generation and all that stuff. AMD came out and said, look, we're building all this stuff. It's going to be great. They had their gaming event in June, and then what did they do in July? They knocked down all the pins that they had set up. So And this is why it's like, Microsoft, please do not announce that you're going to increase Game Pass pricing this month. It would just be, a baseball bat to the face in terms of like, why would I ever trust this company? Let me just jump ship now before I get further invested. I don't know. But this is just so classic Microsoft. They've done it so many times in various different ways across different product lines. Having followed them for 15, 20 years, I don't even know how long it's been at this point. So anyways, friends, it has been a crazy week. I need to go drink some water. Wife and I went on a 4-mile hike this morning. And so I need to go get, de-stinkified, if you will. So anyways, hopefully everybody had a wonderful week to the best of their ability. If you're in the US, hopefully you end the day with all 10 fingers and all 10 toes. As always, my friends, make sure to keep it subscribed here because the only BS on this podcast is me.